What does it take to make a game as successful as Fortnite? Well, if you believe Epic Games, then you might believe that it takes 70 to 100-hour work weeks. They might tell you it takes a hostile work environment in which overtime is implied to be a very important thing to do. Not that anyone's forcing you to do it, but you did see what happened to those people who took a weekend off. They're not here anymore. But we're not putting a gun to your head. This is the environment at Epic Games, according to a new report published on Polygon. In a similar vein to the reports we've seen about BioWare and Anthem, the report was put out there after a long period of talking with anonymous sources who don't want to give their names out because they're afraid of reprisals from Epic, which is an ongoing problem in the game industry. People are afraid to talk about very toxic work environments, things that are dangerous to their health, abusive work environments, and they can't put their names or their faces to the claims, which of course harms their potential veracity, which is of course the way the game industry likes it. This report shines a light on how live services, the latest industry get-rich-quick scheme, may have a particular problem when it comes to crunch periods. Now, these periods of intense work where developers are expected to basically give up their lives and spend all their time working on the game, that normally happens toward the end of a project, but Fortnite is an ongoing project that is rushing to meet the massive demand and keep updates coming, and so it's been reported that there are crunch periods at Epic that last months, just ongoing crunch. At least for certain departments it seems pissing miserable over there. The full report by Colin Campbell is worth a read. I will take a few quotes here from anonymous sources. I work an average 70 hours a week. There's probably at least 50 or even 100 other people at Epic working those hours. I know people who pull 100-hour work weeks. The company gives us unlimited time off, but it's almost impossible to take the time. If I take time off, the workload falls on other people, and no one wants to be that guy. The biggest problem is that we're patching all the time. The executives are focused on keeping Fortnite popular for as long as possible, especially with all the new competition that's coming in. So yes, indeed, the ongoing popularity of a live service might rake in tons of money, but the people on the ground floor are working ridiculous amounts of time, unsafe amounts of time. Studies suggest that working even 50 hours a week leads to stress and a lack of productivity where people get fatigued. So to work 70 to 100 hours is brutal, and it's abusive. It really is. If you're coercing, and we'll get to that in a moment, but if you're coercing, as I've said before, I've been saying this for I think a couple months now, if you are coercing your developers to work long crunch hours, you are mentally abusing them. That's what it is. I know some people who just refuse to work weekends, said another quote, and then we missed a deadline because their part of the package wasn't completed and they were fired. People are losing their jobs because they don't want to work those hours. Another quote says, I've had friends come to me and say, I can't take this anymore. I've had friends break down in tears. The crunch is constant. We work typically 50 or 60-hour weeks and upwards of 70-hour weeks on occasion. If I got to the end of an 8-hour workday and I turned to my supervisor to ask if I needed to stay on, they'd often look at me as if I was actively stupid. Officially, you don't have to keep working, but in reality, sit back down, we'll be here for a while. If you did not do overtime, that was a mark against your character. Right. Here is where we talk about coercion, which I have talked about on the Jimquisition. I've talked about in a few industry BS videos, I think. The idea is what I'm calling the gun-to-head defense, where a company will defend crunch by saying it's voluntary. They're not forcing anyone to do it. Nobody's got a gun to the employees' heads, making them work obscene hours. But as we've just seen in those quotes, there are unofficial consequences. If your work isn't done on time, you can get fired for that. And if it's physically impossible, logistically impossible, to get that work done during normal working hours that a normal human being would be expected, should be expected to work, then you're gonna get fired because you, in their eyes, didn't do your job. The threat of your financial security in their hands, the threat of your future existing at their pleasure being something they could take away at any time, is a prevalent one. It's a very powerful powerful bargaining chip, and it's not a chip you have to explicitly pull out and call attention to. It's always in your back pocket, and the developers, the employees, the contractors, they always know it's there. That's how it works. That's how bargaining from a position of power works. You have the power. You can do as you please, or at the very least, you're in a strong position while they're in a very weak position. With the implied threat of firing hanging over everyone's head, a company doesn't have to nudge very hard to encourage people to work out of fear. And coercion might not be violent force, it might not be putting a gun to anyone's head, but it is nonetheless a form of force. A very manipulative form of force, one that's couched in inherent imbalance in an employer-employee situation. We've also talked before about how, unionization, the lack of unionization, means that game publishers can look at workers as completely disposable, something they can take in, use up, and spit back out. And these reports from Polygon certainly seem to confirm what I've been arguing for quite some time. As one quote goes, you're on a contract, it could be 3 months, it could be a year, but if you don't do the extra work, it's more likely that your contract won't be renewed. All management wanted was people who are disposable. The situation was, come in and do as many hours as we need you. They put the contractors in a situation where if they don't do that overtime, they know they're not coming back. One senior guy said, just get more bodies. That's what the contractors were called. Bodies. And then when we're done with them, we can just dispose of them. They can be replaced with fresh people who don't have the toxic nature of being disgruntled. Without any checks or balances in place, without anyone calling these companies out on their shit, these mass layoffs, these stories of burnout and stress and crunch will keep happening. They can do what they want, and it's only because of recent reports and recent unrest from people who realise, hey, this is fucked up. It's the only reason we're hearing about much of this. Epic's excuses are pathetic. Polygon has quoted them throughout. I'll read just one of their bits of bullshit. All Epic contractors have a fixed contract term that is communicated up front, typically between 6 and 12 months. Epic makes contract renewal decisions based on the quality of work performed and willingness to work at times needed to meet critical release dates. They claim that the average contractor overtime is less than 5 hours per week, but that doesn't mean that the above average isn't obscene like those 70 to 100 hour work weeks. And even in their bullshittery, they've exposed the coercive effect. You know, if a contractor wants to come back, they have to prove willing to work at times needed to meet those critical release dates. Basically put up with abusive, stressful overwork or go away. This is a major problem in the game industry, and it's a problem that the game industry higher-ups would try to convince you is a necessary evil, something that has to be done to make their great games come out, and that's not true. Every industry has told people that organised workforces that negotiating fair wages and fair hours would be the death of those industries, and those industries survived just fine. Turns out that billion-dollar industries headed up by mega-rich people can actually find quite a bit of money when they need to look for it. Those working at Epic do report good pay, and some people report that they've never been mistreated at all, though they have heard of other people having to work ludicrous hours. And some of that's being seen as a trade-off, but it really isn't, because mental health and physical health, I mean, you overstress someone, their body's going to break down as well. Working people until they're sick, until they're breaking down into tears, shouldn't really be worth any amount of pay, but of course people have roofs to keep over their heads, they have bills to pay, people don't have much of a choice. Folks are going to get whatever work they can get, and again, that's where the coercion comes in. It's tough to keep hearing about these abuses in the industry. No one wants to think that their favourite game came at the physical and mental expense of those who worked hard to make it. But it absolutely is not a necessary evil. It's something this industry does because it can get away with it. It's something every industry has tried to do when it could get away with it before the workforce got organised and started to speak up in unison and say, hey, this ain't on, you fucking chunder. Hopefully the continued awareness of this problem will see people, come together and find a way to fix it. There are lots of pushes for game developers to unionise, and I think that's generally a good thing. Getting them all on the same page, getting them to unite against these companies that have all of the power at the moment will only help them long term. Epic gets to do this because it thinks it's normal. Activision gets to lay off hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of staff because it thinks it's normal. And currently, unfortunately, due to the system of triple capitalism that they operate in, it is quote-unquote normal. But as I've said again on many of these videos, the normalcy should be considered aberrant itself, because it's abnormally normal. This shouldn't be normal, because it's not okay. Fuck the AAA game industry. All of those A's stand for arsehole.